You've watched people fall into love like it's the most natural thing in the world. Like gravity, like breathing. You've seen friends disappear into relationships, watched strangers intertwine their fingers on park benches, observed the way people's faces transform when they talk about someone they're falling for, that softening around the eyes, that vulnerability in their voice. And you felt something strange watching all of this. Not quite envy, not quite longing. Something more complex. Something that sits in your chest like a stone you've learned to carry so well you forget it's there until someone asks you about it. You are someone who has never been in love. Not the shallow kind. Not the infatuation that burns bright and dies fast. Not the crush that makes your stomach flip for a few weeks before fading into comfortable friendship or awkward distance. You have never stood at the edge of that particular abyss and allowed yourself to fall. You have never given someone the keys to the most vulnerable parts of yourself and trusted they wouldn't drive through you like a wrecking ball. And here's what nobody tells you about this. You're not broken. You're not defective. You're not missing some essential human component. What you are is protected. What you are is defended. What you are is someone whose nervous system learned, perhaps before you could even speak, that love, real, transformative, soul-bearing love, is the single most dangerous thing you could ever let into your life. This is the paradox that has shaped your entire emotional architecture. The same mechanism that kept you safe has become the wall that keeps you isolated. The armor you built to survive has become too heavy to take off. You perfected the art of self-preservation so completely that you've accidentally preserved yourself right out of one of the most profound human experiences available to us. You tell yourself stories about why. You're too busy, too focused on your career, too independent, too selective, too rational to lose yourself in something as chaotic as romantic love. And all of these things might even be true. But underneath them, if you're honest, if you're willing to sit in the dark with yourself for just a moment, there's something else. There's a fear so old and so vast that it doesn't even feel like fear anymore. It feels like common sense. It feels like wisdom. It's the fear that if you let someone in, truly in, they will find the parts of you that you've worked so hard to keep hidden, and they will leave. Or worse, they will stay but transform from someone who sees you into someone who needs you, and you will spend the rest of your life performing a version of yourself that isn't real because the real you learned long ago, is too much or not enough or somehow fundamentally unlovable. Let's talk about what we're really discussing here. In attachment theory, the framework developed by psychologist John Bowlby and expanded by Mary Ainsworth, what we're exploring is often classified as avoidant attachment taken to its logical extreme. But it's more nuanced than that. You're not simply someone who dismisses intimacy. You're someone who has never allowed the conditions for romantic love to develop in the first place. You've mastered what psychologists call preemptive abandonment, the art of leaving before anyone can leave you, of never arriving fully so you never have to experience the devastation of departure. Think of your emotional system as a medieval castle. Most people have drawbridges. They can lower them, let people in, raise them when necessary. You've built your castle on an island. You've filled the moat with something more effective than water. You've made the journey to your inner world so complex, so exhausting, that most people give up long before they reach the gates. And the few who persist. You've developed sophisticated early warning systems. You can detect potential intimacy from miles away and activate countermeasures before conscious thought even occurs. This isn't cruelty. This is survival architecture. Neurologically, what's happened is fascinating and tragic in equal measure. Your brain's default mode network, the neural system responsible for self-referential thought, social cognition, and imagining the future, has been calibrated differently than someone who moves fluidly in and out of romantic relationships. Where others have neural pathways that light up with possibility when intimacy approaches, yours illuminate with threat assessment. Your amygdala, the brain's fear center, has been trained to recognize vulnerability not as an opportunity for connection, but as a liability that must be managed. This often develops from what psychologists call emotional neglect in childhood, not necessarily the dramatic kind that makes for compelling trauma narratives, but the subtle kind. The kind where your emotional needs were consistently minimized, where you learned that expressing vulnerability led to dismissal or discomfort in your caregivers, where you absorbed the implicit message that your feelings were inconvenient, too intense, or somehow wrong. So you learned to self-soothe before you learned to seek soothing from others. You became emotionally self-sufficient before you even understood what you were giving up. Or perhaps you witnessed a catastrophic relationship, parents whose love curdled into resentment, a sibling whose heartbreak rewired their entire personality, someone close to you who was destroyed by loving the wrong person. And you made a decision, possibly unconsciously, possibly at an age when you were still learning what decisions were. Not me, never me, I will never be that vulnerable. The term for this in-depth psychology is counterphobic behavior, moving toward your fear by controlling its conditions. You don't avoid relationships because you don't want them. You avoid the loss of control that comes with genuine romantic love. You've convinced yourself that if you never love, you can never lose. And technically, you're right. But the cost of this insurance policy is that you've also guaranteed you'll never have. Here's what this choice, this strategy, this protection has cost you. You've never known what it's like to be seen. Not truly seen. Not in the way that someone who loves you sees you, with all your contradictions and flaws, and the strange little habits you're embarrassed by, and the dreams you're afraid to speak out loud. You've never experienced what Erich Fromm called the paradox of love, the simultaneous experience of profound separateness and absolute unity with another person. You've never stood in front of another human being, completely exposed, and had them choose to stay not despite what they see, but because of it. You carry what I call anticipatory grief, mourning losses that haven't happened yet, rejections you haven't experienced, abandonments you're certain are inevitable if you ever let your guard down. You grieve relationships that never existed. You mourn a version of yourself that might have developed if you'd taken different risks. And this grief is invisible, which makes it particularly insidious. Nobody brings you casseroles. Nobody sends sympathy cards. Society doesn't even recognize this as a legitimate loss. The philosopher Soren Kierkegaard wrote about the sickness unto death, not physical death, but the despair of not being able to be yourself. And in a strange way, that's what you live with. The despair of having a self that nobody fully knows. You've become an expert at what psychologists call functional presentation, showing people enough to maintain relationships, reveal enough to seem open, share enough to appear vulnerable, but never, ever showing them the whole thing. Never risking the annihilation of total visibility. And here's the cruelest part. You've become so good at this that even you don't fully know yourself anymore. When you've spent years, possibly decades, treating your deepest emotional self like classified information, you start to lose access to your own files. You experience what's called alexithymia, difficulty identifying and describing your own emotions. You can analyze other people's relationships with surgical precision. You can give brilliant advice about love. But when it comes to your own heart, static, distant, a kind of emotional numbness that you've mistaken for peace. The people in your life think you're doing fine. Better than fine, you're stable, successful, unbothered by the romantic chaos that seems to derail everyone else. They don't see the 3 a.m. moments when you lie awake wondering if there's something fundamentally wrong with you. They don't hear the voice that whispers, "What if I'm not protecting myself? What if I'm just empty? What if there's nothing in here worth protecting?" This is the fear beneath the fear. Not that you'll be abandoned if someone sees the real you, but that there is no real you. That all the years of self-protection have created a moat so wide, there's nothing left in the castle but echoes. Let's get specific about how this shows up in your adult life, because recognition is the first step toward transformation. You mistake intensity for intimacy. You might have passionate friendships, creative collaborations that feel almost romantic in their intensity, intellectual connections that light you up. But the moment someone expresses explicit romantic interest, The moment the nature of the connection shifts from undefined to defined, you disappear. Not always physically. Sometimes you just become a ghost of yourself, suddenly busy, suddenly distant, suddenly not ready, in a way that will remain permanent as long as that person is offering something real. You become an expert in relationships that can't work. You're attracted to people who are unavailable, already in relationships, living in different countries, fundamentally incompatible with you in obvious ways. Because these relationships come with built-in escape routes. They allow you to experience some of the feelings associated with love, the longing, the fantasy, the emotional highs, without ever having to face the vulnerability of actual partnership. You get to be the protagonist in a tragic love story rather than a participant in a real, messy, accountable relationship. You sabotage at the threshold. When someone gets close, when a relationship is actually working, you find reasons to end it. You'll pick fights over minor incompatibilities. You'll magnify small flaws into deal breakers. You'll suddenly become aware of all the ways this person isn't perfect, isn't exactly what you want, isn't meeting needs you never clearly articulated, because articulating needs requires admitting you have them. Psychologists call this deactivating strategies, unconscious behaviors designed to increase distance when intimacy threatens to deepen beyond your comfort zone. You intellectualize emotions until they evaporate. You're brilliant at analyzing relationships, discussing attachment theory, understanding the psychological underpinnings of attraction. But when it comes to actually feeling the feelings, you turn emotions into research projects. You observe your own reactions like you're studying a fascinating but ultimately distant phenomenon. This is what's called defensive intellectualization, using analysis as a shield against experience. You maintain emotional exit strategies. Even in close friendships, even with family, you keep one foot perpetually toward the door. You never fully commit to living in one place. You never completely merge your life with your community. You maintain a kind of rootlessness that you call freedom, but that functions as insurance against the pain of being ripped away from people you've attached to. Because you haven't allowed yourself to attach. You experience periodic relationship anxiety about relationships you're not even in. You'll suddenly panic that you're running out of time, that everyone else is pairing off and you're being left behind, that you've made a terrible mistake in not forcing yourself into relationships. This anxiety is real, but it's not actually about wanting love, it's about wanting to want it. It's about the fear of being abnormal, of missing out, of making the wrong choice by making no choice at all. But when opportunity actually presents itself, the anxiety evaporates and the old protections snap back into place. You've mastered the art of emotional unavailability while appearing emotionally sophisticated. You can talk about feelings beautifully. You can be an incredible listener. You can show up for other people's emotional crises with wisdom and compassion. But you never make yourself the recipient of that same care. You never position yourself as someone who needs. You've become the person everyone calls when they're falling apart, which effectively prevents anyone from seeing you as someone who might be falling apart in a quieter, less visible way. These aren't character flaws. These are coping mechanisms that were once adaptive and have now become constraints. The nervous system doesn't distinguish between past and present threat. Your system is still responding to an old danger as though it's happening right now. And until you recognize this, until you name it, witness it, understand that it's a pattern rather than your personality, nothing changes. The work is not to shame yourself for these patterns. The work is to see them clearly enough that you can make conscious choices about which ones you want to keep and which ones are keeping you from a life you actually want to live. So what does healing look like when the wound is this old, this deep, this integrated into your sense of self? First, understand this. You cannot think your way out of this. This isn't an intellectual problem. This is a somatic problem, a nervous system problem. Your body learned that vulnerability equals danger before your brain developed the capacity for language. So healing requires you to send new information to your body. You do this through corrective emotional experiences, small, manageable moments of vulnerability that don't result in the catastrophe you've been predicting. This might start with what's called inner child reparenting, the practice of identifying the age at which you decided love was too dangerous, and consciously offering that younger version of yourself the safety and acceptance they needed but didn't receive. This isn't about blame. Your caregivers did the best they could with their own nervous systems, their own unhealed wounds. But that doesn't mean you didn't miss something essential. And you now have the capacity to provide it. You begin to practice window of tolerance expansion, deliberately putting yourself in situations that activate your intimacy fear in small, controlled doses and learning to stay present instead of fleeing. Maybe it's sharing something slightly more personal than feels comfortable. Maybe it's letting a friend see you cry. Maybe it's going on a date with someone who's actually available and sitting with the discomfort instead of sabotaging. The goal is not to eliminate the fear. The goal is to teach your nervous system that you can survive the fear. You work on what Carl Jung called shadow integration, the process of bringing unconscious material into consciousness. You examine the parts of yourself you've kept hidden because you've decided they're unlovable. The neediness, the anger, the raw desire for connection that you've dressed up as independence. You practice revealing these parts in safe relationships and noticing that people don't actually leave. Most of the time, they feel closer to you. You might need to grieve actively, consciously grieve, the relationships you didn't have, the risks you didn't take, the version of yourself who might have loved more easily. This grief is not indulgent. It's necessary. As Miriam Greenspan writes in Healing Through the Dark Emotions, the way out is through. The only way to resolve grief is to grieve. You cannot heal what you refuse to feel. And perhaps most importantly, you choose softness. Again and again and again, when every instinct tells you to harden, to protect, to retreat, you practice staying soft. You practice believing that vulnerability is not weakness but courage. You practice trusting that the right people will not weaponize your openness. You practice accepting that yes, you might get hurt, and yes, it will be survivable, and yes, the alternative, a life without ever being truly known, is its own kind of death. The philosopher Martin Buber wrote, "All real living is meeting." He meant that we become fully ourselves only in authentic encounter with others. That the I only exists in relationship to the thou. You've spent so much of your life as an I without a thou, separate, protected, alone in the castle you built to keep yourself safe. But here's what I want you to understand, what I need you to hear. You are not too damaged for love. You are not too defended. You are not beyond repair. You are someone who learned to survive in a particular way, and survival strategies can be unlearned when they're no longer necessary. The very fact that you've made it this far, that you're here, considering this, allowing these words to land, means you still have the capacity for transformation. The door you thought you'd sealed forever. It's locked, yes, but you have the key. You've always had it. The question is not whether you're capable of love. The question is whether you're willing to risk being seen in order to find out what's on the other side of that risk. And maybe you're not ready yet. Maybe you need more time in the castle, more time with your defenses, more time learning who you are in the safety of solitude. That's okay. Healing is not linear. Readiness is not manufactured, it emerges. But if some part of you is curious, if some small voice is saying, what if, then start there. Start with curiosity instead of commitment. Start with one small experiment in vulnerability. Start with the possibility that the story you've been telling yourself about why you can't love might be a story you have the power to revise. You are not broken. You are not incomplete. You are someone who has been waiting for safety, for certainty, for proof that it's okay to want what you want. And the truth is that certainty will never come. Love is not a guarantee. It's a leap, and you've been standing at the edge of that cliff for so long, you've forgotten you have wings. The work is not to become someone different. The work is to become more fully yourself. And sometimes, paradoxically, we only discover who we truly are when we're reflected in the eyes of someone who sees us, completely, terrifyingly, beautifully sees us, and chooses to stay. If this resonated with you, if you recognized yourself in these patterns, share this with someone who might need to hear it. Subscribe if you want more deep dives into the psychology of being human in a world that often feels like it was designed for people who are wired differently than you. And remember, the goal is not to be fixed. The goal is to be whole. And wholeness includes the scared parts, the defended parts, the parts that have never known love. All of it, all of you. You're not alone in this castle. You never were.